Welcome back to 535. I am joined by probably some of the sharpest minds that can tell us what could possibly happen in November as the House adjourns for its August recess. The Senate's not too far behind. So many dynamics at play. I'm so excited for this conversation to geek out with both of you. Jessica Taylor, welcome.
Thank you.
You cover the Senate and governors.
Yep.
And then Erin Covey, you cover the House of Representatives, which has been my playground for the last couple of years. So I wanted to start with you and your expertise on that. Obviously, House Democrats have for some time felt very confident that they could win back the majority, just given a number of issues, dynamics at play, the president, what he's been talking or not talking about as often. But it still could be a very slim majority, and Republicans still have a path, right? Can you tell us a little bit about how you're kind of viewing the landscape at this time?
Yeah, it's not so much that the environment doesn't look great for Democrats right now, it's that the battleground of competitive House races is relatively small, and it's quite a bit smaller than it was in 2018, of course, the last time we were in a midterm during a Trump presidency. And so we're looking at like a different realm of competitive districts as a result. And due to all the redistricting that happened over the past year, Republicans have been able to shore up their majority, which is technically a 3-seat majority, but with redistricting, we think it's effectively more like an 8 or 9-seat majority. So it's a little bit tougher than it looked at the beginning of the cycle.
So what are some of the races that you are looking at? Especially, we're in primary season. August is going to give us more clues as to what's going on. But are there any races in particular, as you look at the next month, you're like, okay, those are the ones to watch. What could they tell us?
Yeah, I mean, we have 18 seats in the toss-up column right now. 14 of those are held by Republicans. So even if you look at our ratings of the competitive districts, Republicans are playing more defense than Democrats right now. One of those toss-up races that I'm watching really closely is Michigan's 7th district, which is held by Congressman Tom Barrett. He won his race November 2024 by about 4 points, but this is a seat that Trump only won by like a point. So he should be among the kind of easiest seats to flip by Democrats in November. But, you know, he overperformed a little bit, and Democrats have a very contentious primary happening there right now that will resolve itself in 2 weeks. But you have one very progressive candidate in William Lawrence. He's actually a co-founder of the Sunrise Movement. And then you have 2 more moderate candidates, Bridget Brink, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, and then Matt Mosdem, retired Navy SEAL, who are kind of splitting that center-left lane. And so things have gotten quite contentious. Right now, I would say Lawrence has a slight edge, but we still have time for things to change.
And before I turn it to you, Jessica, one last question on the House. A number of Democrats have been feeling very bullish in Trump districts that he won by over 10. I think even the Bobby Polito seat down in the Texas Grand Rio Valley, that one is a Trump plus 17, but they're feeling really good about that, and even, you know, projecting that maybe there's a bit of, as they like to say, dummy mandering that went on in Florida in particular. We obviously are waiting for the primaries to shake out there, but how are you looking at those races? And are Democrats maybe overplaying their hand, a little too confident that they could flip some of these very Republican districts?
Look, I mean, I put the Hispanic majority seats, which includes Texas' 15th district, in a different category than like a standard Trump plus 18 seat, because this was a seat that moved really heavily to the right between 2020 and 2024. Trump only won it by a couple of points in 2020, and so it's a part of the country where there's a lot more kind of an elastic electorate, so you can see bigger swings there. You know, I would say Texas looks like a better environment for Democrats right now than Florida too, just because of the statewide politics there. You have an incredibly competitive Senate race at the top of the ticket that is going to energize Democratic turnout. So I think when I look at polling in Texas right now, it looks better for Democrats in Florida. But to your point, in Florida, we still don't have a lot of information. We don't have the primary results there. So I think we have a bit of a ways to go to see how good of a year it could be for Democrats in Florida. And I think it's important to remind people in 2018, even in 2018, it was not a good year for Democrats in Florida. They did not win those statewide races. And so even in a better national environment, I'm still a little less bullish on Dems in Florida this cycle.
A lot to watch there, and obviously on the Senate side too. I remember even just a year ago, everyone was saying there's no way the Senate can flip. It's just such a favorable map for Republicans. I mean, you can tell us now there are a lot of things at play, and Democrats I don't think are too confident, but they're like, maybe we can do this.
There is a path for Democrats that did not exist at this time last year. And I think it's because they've had strong recruiting. They've gotten recruits like Sherrod Brown in Ohio, like Mary Peltola in Alaska. The North Carolina Senate race is looking the best race for them. We rate that one as lean Democrat with Roy Cooper there in that open seat with Tillich retiring. But there's still some hiccups for Democrats that they've got to get through. I think Maine obviously has been the main thing we've been talking about the past couple of weeks. Now that they have a presumptive nominee in Troy Jackson, we'll see kind of how he withstands scrutiny. He's been in politics for a really long time in the state, going back to the 1990s and early 2000s, but he's never faced this much scrutiny. So he's already, he's certainly not as effective a communicator as Graham Plattner was. There's been reports about his temper and different things, but he comes from a part of the state that Democrats have really struggled to do well in. He's outperformed Biden in that area. He outperformed the 2020 nominee Sarah Gideon. Collins still did better in those areas, but it's interesting because you have two northern Mainers that will be running against each other.
Yeah. That's a good breakdown of Maine, because we're all just waiting to see how it all fleshes out, especially this weekend. They'll officially nominate Troy Jackson. We've obviously also been talking about South Carolina, but I am just struck by the fact that Alaska is one of those races that, again, suddenly on the map.
Right.
I think you all just moved it to toss-up.
A couple of weeks ago,
okay, so tell us a little bit about the decision making there and why that race is becoming even more competitive than expected.
Mary Peltola has a history of overperforming, particularly in better, even in difficult years. So she ran quite a bit ahead by double digits of Kamala Harris on the ballot. She very narrowly lost that House seat, but that was in a presidential year. Now I think that Dan Sullivan is certainly a better candidate than she faced in the last midterm cycle in Sarah Palin. But there's some interesting dynamics going on there. I think that their state is really affected by the high price of diesel right now, especially with it being fishing season. She's someone that has a connection, I think, to very rural parts of the state. I mean, her slogan is Fish Family Freedom. So she's not running as your typical Democrat. And I think that, you're going to see Republicans just try to tie her to the National Party, but she has places where she is separated from national Democrats. However, there's another interesting wrinkle on the ballot because Alaska has a top 4 primary system with ranked choice voting. Now there is Dan J. Sullivan that is on the ballot. So that, Republicans tried to kick him off, saying that he's a Democratic plant. He is back on the ballot as Daniel J. Sullivan. The senator will be listed as Dan S. Sullivan as the incumbent. But, in a race that's just a couple of points with ranked choice, could that make the difference? So that wasn't the only reason we shifted that rating, but it was a contributing factor just because the ballot has the potential to be confusing there.
Yeah, and the primary that everybody's talking about is in Michigan. That's in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
I mean, what can happen there? I'm sure you all will move that race based on the outcome in next month's primary.
I mean, I do think that Abdul El-Sayed is a riskier candidate in a state like Michigan. We've seen, as Erin has covered, some, really in the competitive House races, Erin had a really good piece on this a couple of weeks ago. We have seen more centrist Democrats that are winning, but Michigan is not, Manhattan.
Sure.
It's not Denver. It's riskier to put a more progressive candidate on the line there. Now, they will argue he can ramp up energy, he can get young voters out. I'm looking to see, there's been a lot of money spent on Haley Stevens' behalf. She has, there was a Detroit News poll this week that had her up about 7. I think it's very close. I'm watching what the black turnout is there in Michigan. She's really relying on black voters, those older black voters in and around Detroit. Those are more reliable primary voters than some of Abdul El-Sayed's voters that are younger voters that are lower propensity.
Okay. I wanted to ask both of you, there's a number of trends that we can talk about. I'm curious to get your opinion on a number of them, but one that has kind of, throughout this primary season, become a little bit more obvious is, yes, we always talk about the anti-establishment streak that runs through Washington. Like you hear it on the floor of the House and the Senate when Republicans and Democrats are trying to debate each other, but there almost seems like it's this anti-Washington fervor because there's some there's some lawmakers who, for example, ran for governors.
Yes.
And I can't even say that they're establishment because they've barely been on Capitol Hill that long, right? So, I mean, how are you all watching that, and what does that mean? And how should that inform a number of campaigns, a number of lawmakers who are asking voters, hey, send me back. I got this. I can do the thing for you.
I think I'm going to be watching in that South Carolina race to see if Ralph Norman can break through, because he did run for governor. He lost. He came in third, but he, does that sort of stink of Washington make that primary there? Or do you have Darlene Graham that has her late brother's name, not as well known? She's sort of presenting herself as, I think she just put out, familiar name, but new to Washington. Can she kind of capitalize on that? But you're right. We've seen Randy Feenstra lose in Iowa. We've seen Norman and Mace lose. We've seen Michael Bennett. I think there were some unique things at play in each of those races. Feenstra really did not run a very good campaign in Iowa. I think he took a lot of it for granted. If someone like John James loses the Michigan primary for governor, I think that could be a real turning, or let's see how Byron Donalds does in Florida. Sure. They're both leading, but they do have primary challengers. How well do these outside of Washington primary challengers do against them?
Erin, are you seeing this trend too in the House a little bit, or
Yeah.
what are other dynamics you're also are becoming more obvious to you?
I mean, we have seen a number of incumbents lose their primaries already this cycle, and there's a couple more that are quite vulnerable. I mean, Sri Tanadar in Michigan is one that I'm watching in 2 weeks. Ed Case in Hawaii as well, John Larson in Connecticut. So I do think, to your point, there is this a stronger kind of anti-Washington streak among Democratic primary voters than we have seen in the past. And I think a lot of that stems from frustration with party leadership and frustration with members who have been around a really long time and don't have that much to show for it in the minds of these voters. Like that's what we saw in Colorado with Diana DeGette. Her challenger was definitely running to her left on a lot of issues, but I think a lot of it was just the contrast in her 3 decades of experience on the House, but having a very low profile with a young, much more dynamic challenger in Malak Quiros. And so I think that is playing into a lot of these primaries. They are very ideological too, and I do think that the Democratic Party base has really moved left on some issues, particularly the issue of support for Israel, and that has really made it difficult for some of these Democratic incumbents to navigate.
Yeah, that's definitely been a topic of debate even up here. Jessica, I want to ask you just takeaways for governor's races, because those, at least up here, aren't watched as much.
But they could have big implications on redistricting in some of these places. So it's interesting because we have a couple that are more competitive than we expected. In Iowa and Ohio, we both have those in toss-up. Looking at a state like Wisconsin, we have there's a really confusing primary there on the Democratic side, but you have Congressman Tom Tiffany that is he's sailing, he doesn't have a main primary challenge. I think that governor's races are unique because they can be more about the person than the party. I like to say there's no prize for getting the most governorships. So I think that's how you can end up with an Andy Beshear that's governor, a Democrat in Kentucky, but a Phil Scott that's a Republican in Vermont. We're going to see a lot of turnover in these governor's races, but you're right. Some of these members of Congress that wanted to go back home have not been as successful. It's also surprising to me those senators that are leaving to run for governor, because it used to be the other way. I went back and looked. This is the most senators that we've ever had looking to leave to run for governor. Michael Bennett was not successful. We have on August 6th, Marsha Blackburn in a primary there with John Rose. I still think she's favored, but that race could be a little bit tighter than we expected.
That's actually a fascinating point, because I have heard just lawmakers even privately being like, man, I just want to go home. Like, wouldn't it be better to be a governor or even like serve in the state legislature again? Because you can actually get more done.
Yeah, I think being governor is so much better than you're one of 100. You're just stuck here in gridlock. And I think that's why you saw many governors, like Joe Manchin when he was here, famously did not like the Senate.
So if you had to say today, who would win the House majority? What do you think?
Definitely Democrats.
Yeah.
I don't think Republicans have a path, but it is narrow, and they have to really pitch a perfect game.
Yeah, and you hopefully not land on any October surprise landmines.
We'll
that's
see.
That's always the question. What about you in the Senate? What do you think?
Republicans are still favored because, again, like Erin said, everything has to go right for Democrats. There is a path, though, that did not exist. And if we see particularly gas prices continue to go up, fatigue with the war, Trump is certainly not helping members on either side of Capitol Hill right now with everything that he is focusing on instead of wanting to focus on affordability issues. So certainly the environment could worsen for Republicans in the Senate, but if it were held today, I think Republicans would still hold on.
Thank you both for coming and breaking it down so efficiently. This was a great conversation. I know I will be actually bugging both of you.
Absolutely.
The more we get into this general election season. So thanks again for coming.
Great to chat.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Of course. Make sure to stay tuned. There's a congressman who has a bill about supporting unions, how to strengthen them. We'll be right back.